just want to give you some background on what I did twice as a civil rights leader when I was tasked with conducting a civil rights investigation into whether our branch and later our branch of the NAACP and later the local chapter of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference asked me to do the same thing for their organization. So I just want to show you some of the things that went into my and other officers' ability to investigate as a citizen the death of Kendrick Johnson. And we did all this after the case file was released, after the case was closed, because as you should know, when there's an ongoing open investigation, the law enforcement investigating body is not going to release any records or witness statements or anything until they close the case in most instances. So just some of the things I did: lots of written open records requests using the Freedom of Information Act. I reviewed public records like radio talk shows, television broadcasts, newspaper, and internet publications, because the Johnsons and Shaveen King, their attorney, were all over media, both social media and legitimate media out there in the real world, although a lot of their black radio and black media interviews, I would say, were incredibly biased, particularly the Rashad Ritchie show and some things that they did with Roland Martin. Anyway, but back to that. I went around to interviews of public officials. I went around to interview public officials, the sheriff, deputies, crime lab director, because KJ's body was stored at the Valdosta crime lab, school resource officers, school administrators. At that time, the case file was 450 pages. I paid $35 for it, reviewed it. I toured the Valdosta crime lab 3 times. I got the personnel files from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement on Dr. William Anderson, the private pathologist. I didn't get the personnel files for Mary Ann Gaffney Craft because I couldn't find anything online that attempted to impugn her integrity, but I found a lot of stuff online that went after Dr. William Anderson, and I just figured that if there were bad stuff about Mary Ann Gaffney Craft, the Kendrick Johnson family would bring it forward, and they never did. They just made unfounded accusations. I reviewed her autopsy, and I looked at the autopsy photographs. Let's see, I had a conversation with Shaveen King in April when that was when he asked me to get involved with helping to bring the DOJ in. I had a telephone conference with Shaveen King and Kenneth Johnson in July, along with 50 or more civil rights leaders in the state of Georgia. I'll come back to that. The state leaders in the Georgia NAACP directed me numerous times. Usually the direction came from District Coordinator Larry Lockey. So he's not exactly a state officer, he's a middle level officer in the NAACP who is still there. So my branch was under him, so he directed me numerous times to follow up on a signed complaint form that was from the Johnson family. So here's just a summary of my results. All the public officials that I talked to told me the same thing. Anyway, we can go over and over and over the video evidence that shows that the 2 boys were nowhere near KJ, and KJ is last seen alive in the gym. But the Johnson family still doesn't believe it. I was given a tour of the gym. I looked at all the cameras. I saw cameras in different parts of the school. If he was killed somewhere else and moved, it would be very unlikely, if not impossible, for those cameras not to pick it up. And then later on, the FBI analysis of those cameras says that they were legitimate and there was no missing footage, despite the allegations that were made by Victor Blackwell at CNN and his so-called expert Grant Fredericks. They did a reenactment of the death scene with me using a ladder instead of bleachers and several mats. A man climbed inside the mat, yelled. We could barely hear him, even though the mat was lying on the ground when he crawled in, because it would have been too dangerous for him to crawl in head first. in a vertical mat, but you can go online and you can find some wrestling team members who did do a vertical reenactment. But the point I want to make is when he was in the horizontal mat and there was no one in the gym, we couldn't hear him yelling, and there were 2 open ends of the mat, but we couldn't hear him yelling, and we were about 20 feet away. I talked about FERPA laws, and why that applied to what the black radio talk show and CNN reporting, because they kept saying, look, they blurred the tapes, and they wouldn't give anybody a reason why that was. And I was the only person in the NAACP who was trying to explain why FERPA meant that you had to blur the faces of the children. I met with both lawyers regarding the redactions of the students' names, the cell phone records, the videotapes. Both lawyers, meaning the school lawyer and the sheriff's lawyer. I met with Sheriff Chris Prine. He took full responsibility for not calling the coroner, even though Prine was out of town, but there were several other people in his department who were in charge. I got an explanation from Prine regarding the alleged statement that he said no foul play. He told me what was said was that we do not see any signs of foul play based on our initial examination, but the body is going to be sent to the GBI medical examiner for a complete autopsy. So that was substantiated by school officials who overheard the conversation. In one of my videos, I showed you the Board of Education building for Lowndes County, and the family was invited to come in and use a conference room there to get updates during the day. I think the processing of the gym went on for something like 6 hours, because once they determined that KJ was dead, that's when they called the EMTs and the CSI, Crime Scene Investigation Group. The Valdosta Crime Lab was asked to send people over to help the GBI and the Lowndes County Sheriff's Department process the scene. I looked at both autopsies, and both of the pathologists, and this is what the Kendrick Johnson family doesn't want you to know. Their own pathologist said in his autopsy, this child was not beaten. There's no wounds, offensive or defensive wounds. There's maybe 2 tiny scrapes on his knuckles, which could have happened from struggling in the mat, but it's certainly not a defensive or offensive wound. And then I'll talk later about lividity, but when a body dies, blood starts to pool. It starts to move down upon the force of gravity, and the lividity for Kendrick Johnson shows that he was alive when he went inside the mat, and that he died inside the mat in a vertical head down position, and the blood pooled in that direction. If he died outside the mat, the blood would have pooled in a horizontal direction, and there would have been marks on his wrists and ankles where people had to move him to get him in the mat, and there's none of that. Okay, the second autopsy conducted by William Anderson is very nebulous. He says that law enforcement needs to do a better job. Really? Okay, in my opinion, that was just designed to make them believe that their money was well spent to please his client. Okay, the second pathologist, as I alluded to earlier, has very questionable credentials and very volatile public accusations regarding his employment at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. And he's also made statements to a what I consider an illegitimate podcaster, that his boss at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement is really the one who should be looked at as lying and making up stuff. Of course, I've never heard him say that to a journalist, a real journalist, but he'll say it to podcasters. Okay, and I had 3 tours of the Valdosta Crime Lab. I specifically questioned the director at the time, Barry Funk, regarding the body cooler, because the parents said that the body cooler was that the temperature was turned up to cook his body, and they also claimed that acid was thrown on his body. Jackie Johnson has a video out there saying that the crime lab wasn't operating. I think she means the body cooler wasn't operating. So he showed me all of the backup systems that they have. If they have a electrical outage, then a backup system generators come on, because obviously a body stored at the crime lab is evidence and you have to preserve the evidence. He showed me that. So basically, I don't know what else a civil rights organization could have or should have done in order to address the Johnson's claims that a vast conspiracy here in Valdosta covered up a murder. And I just want to show you what we did, because they say nobody cared, nobody did anything. Well, now they say it's a white woman and she's being paid off. Well, guys, y'all want to keep saying I've been paid off? I did all that as a volunteer. I was a volunteer for civil rights organizations for years and years and years in this town, and even the people who are criticizing me today, I can go back and I can show you where they were so happy with the volunteer work that I did. But anyway, let me just conclude, and here's, I can't go over all of this right now. Here's some of the records that are in the case file. When it was initially released to the public, it was redacted, meaning that the minor students' names had to be hidden because of a law called FERPA. Here's a witness statement from Bruce Brown, who talks about getting beat up by Chapa and Nunu, he alleges. Here's photographs of the death scene, and I can't go through all of them. And here's the two autopsies, the one by the GBI and the one by William Anderson. And I don't have the time to go through both of those on a video. Here's an extraction report, and here's just some of the lawsuits filed by Jackie and Kenneth Johnson, and here's a list of some of the people that they sued. And I'm sorry, folks, you know, I know that you don't want to be publicly affiliated with this, and this isn't even all the people that they sued. These are various deputies with the Lowndes County Sheriff's Department. The Bells, of course, one of their friends, the chief of police of Valdosta Police Department, director of the GBI, the superintendent of the school, of Valdosta Crime Lab, CSI, and it's just, oh, here's more. Let's see, GBI agents, detectives, Marianne Gaffney Craft, the first medical examiner to look at his body. And I think there was, in litigation, I think there were at least 40 people that got sued by the Johnson. And in all of these lawsuits, it's my understanding they received affidavits from a lot of these people, but they never cross-examined any of them by having them be deposed. The only people that they deposed and actually questioned were the Bell family, the 4 members of the Bell family. That was it. They accused over 40 people. And then I guess lastly, let's see, okay, here's something that I'll come back to about positional asphyxia. But in this, somewhere in this case file, there's there's 2 or 3 articles about positional asphyxia, and I'm going to come back to that and just do a total video. Okay.